I want to make one thing clear before we get started with this video. I don't hate James Rolfe. I really don't. In fact, I actually like the guy a lot. I've never met him before, but from what I've seen of him, he seems like a really nice, funny, and smart guy. I love his work as AVGN, and I even like some of his other works like Monster Madness and whatnot. But that doesn't mean I have to agree with everything he says. So for today's video, I want to go ahead and talk about a video that I've wanted to talk about for a while, about his re-review for the 2014 Godzilla film. Now, to give a quick summation, I really like the movie. Well, I like it, fine, but it does have some flaws to it. Some in which he does address that I do kind of agree with him on. But he does say some things that I do agree with him on, which we'll talk about firstly. So, with that said, let's go ahead and start this response video by talking about some of the things that I do agree with him on.
When I first saw it, I was very enthusiastic. Even though it was a Hollywood film, not from Toho, it was the first Godzilla movie of any kind in 10 years, so I accepted it.
So, before we start talking about the things that I do agree with him on, I think it's important I also mention this. I too was very, very hyped and enthusiastic for this movie when it was first announced 2 years prior to its release. The thing was first announced back, I think, in early 2012, and since then, when I heard about this and saw screenshots of its early leaked trailers, not trailers, but teaser trailers, I was very hyped for it. And then once the actual trailers started resurging, that's when that's when my hype levels basically went through the freaking roof, and I was very excited about that. Just wanted to get that out there.
I mentioned the last time that I thought the monsters, the Mutos, didn't look very original. They reminded me too much of the monster from Cloverfield, Super 8, and Gauss from the Gamera films.
So this is one point I do kind of agree with him on. While I was very enthusiastic of the fact that Godzilla was actually going to be fighting monsters in this movie, the monsters that he did fight, not only were they not established characters, unlike that of the up-and-coming Godzilla King of the Monsters movie, which will be pitting him against 3 of his classic adversaries. In this one, not only does he fight brand new ones, but the new ones, I'll be honest, looking back on them, are not very interesting in terms of their design. They do have some cool ideas behind them, like I love that it goes for that idea that the male is smaller than the female and the male can fly, kind of like Mothra in that sense. Another thing I do like with the female one, though, is not only is she bigger, but she has like a egg sac, kind of like that of a spider, which was, I thought a nice little touch. It was a little bit disturbing, not really disturbing, but disgusting, but it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool.
I also mentioned how the Mutos seemed to steal the focus away from Godzilla, and how every time the monsters would meet, they would cut away and save all the action until the very end.
And again, this is another point I do kind of agree with him on. I too, even the first time watching this, was kind of annoyed that they would keep cutting away from the monster action. I know everyone's already talked a lot about this, so I won't dwell too much on it. Let's just say I have hopes that the sequel will, much like with Kong Skull Island, put as much focus on the monster as they possibly can. I'm not saying don't have any human characters in it whatsoever, because honestly that would be kind of redundant, but make sure to have the right kind of balance in there.
I wasn't really in love with this film, but I said that overall, it was a welcome return to a franchise that had been dormant for too long. But what I meant to say was this. We all complained about the first American version from TriStar. Now that they answered our complaints, Godzilla now looks like Godzilla and he breathes fire at the very end. So now I feel bad to complain because now it sounds like I'm being picky. Well, the truth is, this movie raised other problems. Before I get into that, first let me talk about what I liked. The opening credits. It got me from the very start. With all that 50s stock footage, it feels just like a classic monster movie.
And this is another area that I very much agree with him on. The opening credits, and they even did something similar to this, like in Kong Skull Island, are very well done. And yeah, they do feel like that of a classic monster movie, even kinda reminding me a little bit, but in a different sense, to that of the original Godzilla movie. And I actually really like that one. In fact, the first Godzilla movie is admittedly one of my favorites of all time. Not just in kaiju, but in general.
The music is also very good. I wish they'd bring back the traditional Godzilla theme though. Does any franchise nowadays keep its theme anymore? But still, excellent music. The first act is great. The tension, the build-up, the nuclear plant being destroyed, it's a great lead-in to a monster that's not Godzilla. But anyway, the actor who plays the main character's father, the engineer at the nuclear plant, he was fantastic. His name's Bryan Cranston. He seems to be famous mainly in TV, but I didn't know who he was. This was my first time seeing him, so I had a totally fresh opinion, and I thought he was excellent. But he's only in the first act, and without him, there's no other awesome characters, so the whole movie goes downhill.
Now, this is another area that I do really agree with him on. The first act, and even to a lesser extent the third act, are easily the best parts of the movie. The first act having a lot of good amount of build-up, and having easily the best character in the movie, but we'll get to that in a minute. And I do find it a little funny that this was his first introduction to Bryan Cranston. Now, granted, my first introduction to him wasn't with Breaking Bad. In fact, I'll be honest, I still have not seen that show. I'm sorry. But my first introduction to him was in the hit comedy show Malcolm in the Middle. But this was the first time seeing him play a very dramatic role, and he did a really good job with it. So that's another point I really agree with him on.
Actually, Dr. Serizawa, played by Ken Watanabe, was good too. The cinematography. There's some really good camera choices. Gareth Edwards had the right idea to always shoot the monsters from human viewpoints. He never puts the camera where a person could never actually be. This makes the monsters seem more real. Dating back to the first Godzilla, the shots where he looks best is when you're looking up at him or seeing him from a distance. They got that right.
And again, another area I agree with him on that relates to the original film. I love it when giant monster films, at the very least a good chunk of the time, film their monsters from human perspectives, at least in a perspective where a human would be at all times. Like inside of a building, on the ground down below where it's looking up. That I love a lot. I think even Guillermo del Toro used that to certain levels in Pacific Rim, at least when you're looking at the kaiju from, again, the human perspective, like on bridges or in buildings and whatnot. That, I think, just as a general rule of thumb, whenever you're making a kaiju movie, whether or not you're going to focus more on action or drama, make sure you have that kind of cinematography in mind.
Now, what I didn't like. Killing off the best character, I already mentioned. His son and the girlfriend, they are not interesting. I didn't really care that much about these characters. They're bland and boring. I didn't hate them either, I just thought that they were flat and too low-key. I don't know, they just didn't do much for me.
So, I'm probably going to strike a nerve with some kaiju fanatics out there. Now, don't get me wrong, I love kaiju films, but let's be honest, and the reason this point now kind of baffles me, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to act like they aren't boring and generic, because they kind of are. But let's be honest, outside of maybe the original Godzilla and Godzilla Final Wars, and to a lesser extent this movie, try to name more than maybe 5 characters in the other Godzilla films that left a fair amount of impression on you beyond their names.
Godzilla having nothing to do with the first act. He only becomes relevant after the Muto hatches. Godzilla appearing 1 hour into the film. That is too late, and finally when he does appear, it cuts away.
Now, this is one where I semi-disagree with him on. Given that it's a 2-hour-long movie, I don't mind waiting to finally get a good appearance of Godzilla an hour in, but I do kind of agree with him on that. And this is one of the other areas where I do agree with him on, just getting that out of the way, is when they cut away from the monster action. That, even watching the film again, always does kind of annoy me a little.
Godzilla's look, I hate to compare, but it's better than the TriStar version. Even though he looks like Godzilla this time, When he roars, the mouth is too reminiscent of the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. You know what I mean? When you see those computer-generated jaws opening, it's beginning to look really stock and cliche, like anything that's close to a dinosaur needs to copy Jurassic Park. Speaking of which, obviously it's CG. That's just the way it is nowadays. People think it's better than rubber suits because you can do a whole lot more with it. Yes, rubber suits are more challenging. Rubber suits can look fake, but when they look good, they look really good because there's something actually there. And I don't think CG looks any better. The same way you can tell a rubber suit is fake, I can tell CG is fake. Even if you do a really good job with it, my eyes are still telling me it's a computer-generated image, like a video game. So, what's more fake here, really?
Okay, so this is a part where I also kind of disagree with him on. Yes, I do have a huge soft spot for the rubber suit effects of the older Godzilla films, but let's be honest, I do agree more with the general consensus that there's a lot more you can do with CGI, especially if it looks really good, and the 2014 film is no exception. Also, I kind of feel a little bit peeved at that remark of the video game thing, and that's something about CGI effects. Excuse me. And that's something about CGI effects that kind of annoy me when people make that comparison, is comparing it to a video game. First of all, if you're going to do that, compare that to film with CGI that are not the least bit convincing, especially when you want to compare it to a bad video game. Like, take this remark from Rob in the Channel Awesome's video of the first viewing of Green Lantern.
I mean, there were PS3 games that already looked like this. Or better.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas with the effects in this movie, even though a big part of me still knew it was CGI, it still looked really awesome. And this does lead to a couple other areas that I definitely do strongly disagree with. And from what I can tell from the comments section, I'm not the only one who thinks so.
The destruction. Godzilla doesn't destroy enough buildings. Sure, lots of stuff gets wrecked when he's fighting the Mutos, but it's never the way it was in the old movies, where Godzilla is scary because he's going to demolish everything in sight. That's where a Hollywood film with an enormous budget could improve on what was done before. Let's see the full magnitude of what this creature is capable of doing.
While I do agree that seeing him destroy more things would be nice, I also kind of get what they were trying to do in making him more like a hero that the world needs but doesn't deserve. And yeah, don't get me wrong, some might say that's a little backwards. Well, if he's supposed to be a hero, why is he destroying it all? Well, he's a giant 350-foot tall animal. He kinda can't help that. So, in the end, they were trying to make him look a little bit more heroic, especially with that funny little news tagline at the end of that on that TV at that stadium. I really like that little moment. So yeah, there's really not too much else I could say about that one, so let's just move on.
The destruction. Godzilla doesn't destroy enough buildings. Sure, lots of stuff gets wrecked when he's fighting the Mutos, but it's never the way it was in the old movies, where Godzilla is scary because he's going to demolish everything in sight. That's where a Hollywood film with an enormous budget could improve on what was done before. Let's see the full magnitude of what this creature is capable of doing. We see him causing tidal waves, and that's great. Godzilla should be a force of nature, but with Godzilla hardly in the scene and just the tidal waves, I feel like we're watching a film about a tsunami. They took the natural disaster part a little bit too literal. Cutting away when the Muto reaches Las Vegas, and then again when the two monsters are about to fight for the second time? Unacceptable. It's fine to focus on the humans. The humans are the ones that ground it in reality to make it relatable, but you need to have the monster scenes too. It made no sense to me to tease you for almost 2 hours like it was a joke or something, and then give us everything at the end.
Again, this is an area that I do kind of agree with him on. That while I do kind of admire the film for still giving us a fair amount of the human stuff, which even then still semi-backfired because most of the humans in this film are just not that interesting. But I do agree, again, cutting away from the monsters more than once before the climax was pretty annoying. I do strongly hope that Godzilla King of the Monsters does not pull this same kind of tactic on us. But then again, from what I've heard about it, it thankfully does not seem like it's going to be going down that route, so At least they seem to be listening to our complaints.
The dark cinematography. Okay, even though I liked some of what they did with the camera work, too much of it is shot at night. Most of the film has a dark, murky look. Even during the finale, the whole thing is at night, and sometimes you can hardly tell what's going on. Especially on my TV screen, it looks bad. There's not much contrast, everything looks washed out. Although I watched the 3D version too, and that looks a lot better. There's too many scenes of soldiers running around. What is the preoccupation with soldiers running around? It's not interesting, especially the part where they're all jumping out of the sky. It really dwells on that. The music is going on and everything. Whenever I'm watching that part, all I'm thinking is, why is this the dramatic focus of the film right now? Just, I'm like, yeah, okay. Something else should be happening in its place right now. You can still focus on human drama, but have it be more closely related to the threat of Godzilla.
So, remember when I was talking about earlier when there was a big thing in the comment section that a lot of people disagreed with him on? This was it. Not so much the part about the military running around. That one I kind of agree. If you're going to have military in this film, at the very least have them do more things to break up the monotony. But that part of where they're doing the halo jump and jumping high from within the skies, that was one of the few things about the film, at least outside of the monster stuff, that I really liked, because it was visually interesting, the music was, once again, really good, and I don't think it was trying too hard to be dramatic necessarily. I think it was just trying to build up the fact that we are now entering the climax of the film, and we're about to get some real action going. And for the most part, in my opinion, I thought it delivered on that front.
Perfect example is on the train when a young boy is separated from his parents. Not much really happens. He gets back to his parents and it's resolved rather quickly. But how about expanding on that? What about instead of soldiers jumping from the sky, how about seeing the boy trying to escape Godzilla? Maybe the parents find him on the train and they're reaching out for him just as Godzilla's tail splits the train in two and they have to safely rescue him from one half of the train as it dangles on the elevated tracks.
Now, that is a part I do agree with him on. While I don't think the halo jump thing should be altered or removed in any sort of way, though I know he's not technically saying that, but I do agree that I wanted to see a little bit more about that, like seeing more about this boy being separated from his family, but it gets resolved way too quickly. That would have been a bit more interesting. So, yeah, I definitely kind of agree that is a bit of a missed opportunity.
Moving on. About Godzilla's screen time, I know if you count up the minutes of how much you actually see Godzilla, it's probably comparable to some of the older Godzilla movies. I'd imagine, without having actually counted, you probably see Godzilla just as much as you do in Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, for example. But it's not about what those movies did, it's about what this movie should have done. It's about how you pace the monster scenes, how you move from a dramatic scene to an action scene and back to a dramatic scene. How do you string everything together into a strong narrative that holds your attention? And this was very unbalanced. Quite honestly, I find the majority of the film to be boring. From the theater to seeing it at home, the experience has been just the same. It starts out good, then after the Muto appears, it begins slowly going downhill. By the 1 hour mark, we desperately need Godzilla to show up. He shows up, big applause moment, and then he's gone, and that last hour really drags. After all the stuff with the soldiers, I feel mentally drained, and by the time the fight comes with the monsters at the very end, it feels too late. I'm exhausted.
Now, that's an area there where I mostly disagree with him on. Yes, the film is very slow, and the second act especially, even taking into consideration that big applause moment with Godzilla, is really slow and boring. But in my opinion, I get what this movie was trying to do with that. They were trying to build it up the best they can. They were basically kind of going for the Jaws effect with this movie, in building up the big guy's appearance and then delivering on what we came to see. And I do kind of agree the action at the end could have been done a little bit better, but in my opinion, I think it was just enough to finally break up the monotony of the second act and delivered on what it was supposed to. So this is an area where, again, I mostly disagree with him on, but yeah, even then, there still could have been just a little bit of tweaking there.
We're always going to compare it to the TriStar version and say how much better it was than that. As far as sticking close to the character of Godzilla, yes, it's better. Otherwise, I hate to say this, and I know this is going to be really shocking to hear, but there are some things about the TriStar version that are better. I rewatched it recently, and there's a lot more practical effects than you'd remember. All I could remember was a CG lizard running around, but if you actually watch it again and look closer, there's a lot of great miniature work. Lots of the military vehicles are actual models being blown up, and if you think back to Independence Day, the buildings that the spaceships blew up were also miniatures, so it's not surprising that they were still using those kind of effects on Godzilla. There were even a few shots where it was a man in a suit, especially during the third act where the whole movie turns into Attack of the Mutant Raptors. Lots of the baby Godzillas were either suit actors or animatronics. Godzilla appears much sooner. It never leaves you hanging for so long. It's paced much better. When we need to feel suspense, there's suspense. Whenever there needs to be action, there's action. It balances it rather than backloading all the action to the end.
Now again, this is actually more of a half and half. There are some things I do agree with him on, and some things that I don't. For one thing, while yes, you could make the case that the TriStar movie is better paced in terms of what it delivers, it's not that interesting, not that engaging. This is one of those things where, honestly, I kind of agree more with Doug on his opinions on both the 2014 and the 98 film, where no matter how much you may dislike the 2014 film, like he says in his editorial of sucky summer movies, guaranteed they would have done it way worse in that time period. And in my opinion, that I feel holds a lot of truth in this comparison. I do agree that I do agree that I wish they could have brought in more practical effects for the 2014 film, but I'd rather have a film that at least has consistently good effects, regardless of the lack of practical, than one that does have a fair amount of practical effects that, granted, are not bad, but the CG in it is so badly dated. That definitely looks like it could be at best a PS2 game character. And I'm not even kidding on that.
They're both totally different kind of movies. They're polar opposites. The TriStar version is very silly in tone. It's only trying to be a big spectacle, a summer blockbuster, with a lot of action and humor. It doesn't try to be anything more than what it is. Think of it as a follow-up to Independence Day, which is exactly what it is. The Legendary Pictures version is a much more serious movie. It doesn't joke around as much, even though at its basics, it's still a monster movie, not to mention it actually has Godzilla.
Now, this is again another area where I see where he's coming from, but I don't exactly agree with it. Yes, I do agree that tonally they are very different movies, the 98 film clearly trying to be more silly, and the 2014 one being clearly more serious. It kind of depends on which one you prefer more, but for me personally, as well as a lot of people, I'm sure there are some people who would prefer the 98 version, which if you do, that's great, I'm happy for you. But for me and a lot of others, we would prefer the 2014 film, and especially the up-and-coming Godzilla King of the Monsters sequel, which I am very excited about.
I don't feel right saying the TriStar version is a better movie because it's so goofy and that the monster doesn't represent what we all envision as Godzilla, but after watching both of them back to back, I can't help but admit that it's a lot more entertaining, and I never thought I'd say that.
Okay. Now, this one's not going to be an insult, but I do have to give him credit that he's at least acknowledging that, at least on a technical level, especially on a technical level, that the 2014 film is better. Because I think anyone can agree that on a technical level, the 2014 film is the best one. But in the end, like I said, it is kind of subjective which version you would prefer to watch. Because like I said, in the end, this is not an attack on him. If he honestly does prefer the 98 version, that's fine with me. I don't have a problem with that. I just want to, in the end of the day, this whole video is just me trying to throw my 2 cents in there. So that was my response to James Rolfe's video for Godzilla 2014, specifically his re-review. So in the end, as I stated at the very beginning, I do not hate James Rolfe. I like him a lot. I like his work. I think he's a nice, smart guy. And I do kind of agree with some of the things he said, but I do, in the end, strongly disagree with a lot of what he said also. In the end, I definitely, like a lot of people, like the 2014 one over the 98 version. But I do agree with him on some points about the 98 version at least having a bit more practical effects, even though I do prefer more consistent quality in the effects. And at the very least, I can say that for the 2014 film and not the 98 one. So, in the end, it's his opinion in the end of the day, so I guess in the end it doesn't really matter that much. I just wanted to the whole point of this video was just to throw my 2 cents in there and to give a better understanding of why I disagree with this video. So until this weekend, I definitely will have my countdown video. It's going to be a short one, so don't expect a whole lot from that, at least not on the same veins as the ones that I do have planned later for this year. But until then, I'm King Gargantuous, and take care.